Welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about some of the biggest what ifs in NFL history. Okay, and as an Indianapolis Colts fan, I have to start with Andrew Luck. What happens if he doesn't retire? What happens if he gets better protection and doesn't have to retire? I think about the Colts team the year that he retired. For the first 5 or 6 weeks of that season, that Colts team was so good around the quarterback that Jacoby Brissett was in the MVP conversation. There were literally people talking about Jacoby Brissett looks like he could be the MVP this year if he keeps playing like this. So you could imagine if Andrew Luck stays on that team, was as stacked as it was, as good as the defense was that season, as good as the offense was around him that season. I mean, all the makings were there for him to come and make the run that we all thought he could finally make, right? You think about the 2018 season, he finally comes back from injury. He was gone for like a season and a half. Finally comes back from his injury. They start 1-5. Everything looks bad. Andrew Luck's not the same anymore. He's not the guy he used to be. And then the Colts win 10 straight games to make it to the playoffs. Texans won the AFC South, but the Colts made it to the playoffs. Then after making it to the playoffs in 2018, they went to Houston and beat the Texans 21-0 in the wild card round. Now they, of course, went and got blown out in Foxborough after that. But the fact is that what we saw after Andrew Luck came back in 2018, the way 2018 went and the way everything looked in 2019, it just looked destined that we were finally going to make a run. And then he retires out of nowhere, right? So then that Jacoby year happens, not great. And then the COVID year happens, and we get Philip Rivers during that season. And I've always thought, and I will continue to think, if the Colts had Andrew Luck in 2020 instead of Philip Rivers, that team would have ended up with the best record in the NFL. That team had a really good chance to win the Super Bowl. But instead, we ended up with Philip Rivers, who admittedly, I loved having Philip Rivers. Huge Philip Rivers fan to this day because of what he did with the Colts and the way he was able to prove everybody wrong. He was so good for the Colts. And as good as Philip Rivers was, Andrew Luck would have been infinitely better, could have done everything better than Philip Rivers and could have been better for that team. And I just think I feel like there's no question the Colts would have at least one Super Bowl right now if Andrew Luck doesn't retire. But we're always going to be saying what if, because it did happen, because Ryan Grigson's dumbass couldn't get offensive linemen to protect the franchise quarterback that was getting murdered year after year after year. Okay, so now that I've said my piece about the Andrew Luck retirement, let's move on to the Tuck rule game, one of the biggest what ifs in NFL history. You think, would John Gruden get traded a month after the game, or would Oakland have re signed him? Had that not happened, if they end up going to the Super Bowl, if they win the Super Bowl or lose the Super Bowl, who knows? If they go to the Super Bowl, does Oakland keep Gruden? You think about it, he got traded to the Bucks and signed a 5-year, $17.5 million contract. In that trade, Oakland got 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks plus $8 million in cash from the Buccaneers. All right, and what they end up with for those draft picks, they ended up with offensive tackle Langston Walker, defensive end Taylor Brayton, cornerback Philip Buchanan, who was a decent pro, linebacker Sam Williams, running back Ryan Hogue. You ever heard of any of those guys? They make an impact for the Raiders. Didn't matter for the Raiders. No. But what did John Gruden do? Went to the Bucks, and the Bucks beat the Raiders in the Super Bowl the following season. Not only beat the Raiders in the Super Bowl, but absolutely demolished the Raiders, embarrassed the Raiders in the Super Bowl. Does that ever happen? If the Tuck rule doesn't happen, who knows? Now, you look further. Does Tom Brady become Tom Brady? Does Bill Belichick become Bill Belichick? You think about it, without that first ring, maybe some guys leave instead of re-signing to come back and try to win again. Maybe some guys don't come to try to win with that team. Maybe the Patriots draft another quarterback and it continues to create confidence issues for Tom Brady. And Tom Brady, again, is never able to become Tom Brady and gets replaced at some point. Tuck rule game changed NFL history more than we could ever know. And we'll always be wondering, what if? Realistically, hindsight, it's a good rule. But I'll always stand on the fact that it was the wrong call. And the next what if we have here is going to be, what if John Elway went to play for the Colts, right? He refused to play for the Colts. He wanted to be closer to the West Colts, and the Colts were still in Baltimore in 1983. Okay, he was drafted by the Colts, but he was traded 6 days later to the Denver Broncos for quarterback Mark Herman, offensive tackle Chris Hinton, and a 1984 first round pick, which ended up being Ron Soul. And of course, John Elway goes on to win 2 Super Bowls with the Broncos, right? If he stays in Indy, do they ever win any championships in Indy, right? Do the Broncos ever win any championships with Terrell Davis? Do they ever end up with Terrell Davis? If the Colts end up winning championships or they're just more successful, even if they don't win championships, do they end up in a position where they don't have Peyton Manning later on? Right. And if they end up not with Peyton Manning, where does Peyton Manning go? Right. If Elway plays for the Colts, that changes so much. Where does Tom Brady end up one day? Does Tom Brady end up getting a starting role one day after he comes into the NFL as a backup? Like the questions that come into that, the amount of NFL history that gets changed if John Elway stays with the Colts is crazy. And we'll always be asking what if, especially as a Colts fan, always wonder what would have happened in NFL history of John Elway would have actually played for the Colts. But in retrospect, I'm glad he didn't because growing up a Peyton Manning fan was pretty sweet. I mean, talking about the Mannings, let's talk about Eli Manning not wanting to play for the Chargers. You know, he was worried about the Chargers just as a whole, as an organization at the time, and the direction, the leadership, and everything. You know, he was drafted by the Chargers with the first overall pick in 2004, but then was traded to the Giants for Philip Rivers, who was drafted with the fifth overall pick. And there was also a third round pick in 2004 and a 2005 first and fifth round pick that went to the Chargers. I know this is basically the same situation as what we were talking about with John Elway. You know, Eli Manning goes on to win 2 Super Bowls with the Giants. You know, Rivers never went to a Super Bowl, and the Chargers were consistently disappointed during his time there. You know, there were some years, one year they had the best offense and the best defense in the league and lost their first playoff game. Right? The Chargers are just known for always disappointing. Just what they do. So seemingly Eli Manning was correct for being worried about the organization, right? So he made the right choice. But if he doesn't make that choice, do the Chargers ever overcome and end up winning a Super Bowl? Or does Philip Rivers end up in a better situation? Does Philip Rivers, is he greater than he already was? Would he have been better in New York? And I think that's a fair assessment because I think when you look at it, Eli Manning, Philip Rivers, very comparable careers, in my opinion. And I honestly think Philip Rivers might have been a better quarterback, but Eli Manning ended up winning the 2 Super Bowls. So that's always going to differentiate those two. And people are always going to say Philip Rivers wasn't a guy that could win that. But I'm not entirely sure if that's the truth. I just think situations matter. And I think what we see with the Chargers is indicative of what always happens with the Chargers. So yeah, I think Philip Rivers would have won 2 Super Bowls with the Giants. I don't know. I think there's a chance maybe he wins one at some point. But we'll always be asking, what if? And the last what if is maybe the biggest what if, and that's what if the AFL never merges with the NFL. All right, this is just a quick breakdown. This is I could sit here and make a really long video out of this, but I'm going to try to make this a quick explanation of the biggest what if in NFL history. Okay, Al Davis at the time. If you're a younger fan, you don't know who Al Davis is. Al Davis was the owner of the Raiders for a really long time. His son Mark is currently the owner of the Raiders. Al Davis passed away a few years ago, but he's one of the most notorious owners of all time. And one of the reasons is because of his take no prisoners approach to the way he did business. But back in the day when this merger was taking place, you know, his take no prisoners approach made other owners in the NFL fearful of diminishing the profits and reducing the talent in the NFL. You know, and they were worried that all of that would affect the business enough that would have eventually collapsed the NFL. Right. And then you look at the AFL at that time, the AFL owners had deeper pockets. They were getting lucrative media contracts, and they had some of the most popular football players of that time in their league. So, for all intents and purposes, the NFL could have merged with the AFL. We could be all AFL fans and not NFL fans like that. The way it all worked is kind of wonky. And if you like, you know, drop down in the comments if you want me to make a more detailed video about this. I might do that anyways because I was really intrigued to learn about this as I was reading through it. And with the AFL, seems like they were the dominant figure, right? And if you look at it, if the NFL would have folded, some of the teams that would have disappeared and that we wouldn't have now if these two never merged and the NFL folded would have been the Packers, the Colts, the 49ers, the Cowboys, the Giants, the Lions, the Eagles, the Rams, and the Steelers. Imagine all the history that comes with those teams right there. Imagine if we just didn't have them anymore, right? So the fact that these two leagues merged instead of just trying to do their own thing and trying to kill each other off, these two coming together gave us those historic teams. A lot of Super Bowls that have been won were just named in those teams right there. And then you think about the AFL teams and who they had at the time of the merger and the history that came into the NFL when these merged. It's the Patriots, the Bills, the Oilers, the Jets, the Broncos, the Chiefs, the Raiders, and the Chargers. So much history in this merger just came out of this merger. Like so many teams that we just mentioned that are still around. This merger shaped football. And as a football fan, as an NFL fan, somebody that absolutely loves football, especially NFL football, I'm so thankful that these guys decided to merge instead of just trying to kill each other off. Because the way it's been set up 50 years down the line and the way it all is, and as popular as it is, as much as we all love it, I'm so glad that it happened this way, because I don't even want to imagine. We can sit here and talk about what if. I don't want to what if the AFL not merging with the NFL because I love the way it is. But it's a fun hole to dive down into, and I will at some point I will revisit this what if, and I'll make a more detailed video on it because I think we'll all have fun learning more about it. And if there are any more what ifs that you're curious to hear about, put them down in the comments. If you want me to talk about it, I'll make a video about it and we can talk more about it. All right, and don't forget to subscribe and keep coming back for more off-season content. I'll see you for the next video.